for doing this interview. So again, this is a personal branding series interviews that I'm doing on my blog, and what I will do is I'll request you to kind of please introduce yourself for my audience, and then we will get into the questions.
Thank you, Anisu. Yeah, my name is Scott Shirai, Shirai. I'm Japanese American.
Okay, okay. And you have some background. I mean, I saw your profile. You won some very prestigious awards. You've been a fellow of the College of, you've been part of the PRSA, one of the earliest to be inducted, and you've been accredited with the Public Relations Society of America. So I think there's a whole lot of great work you've done along your journey, and I'm sure that's something which a lot of people will love to hear from you as we go along in this interview. So to begin, what's your definition of personal branding? So how would you define it? How would you kind of call it out?
Well, Anisu, to many people, personal branding may be their mark that they wish to leave with an employer or within an industry. But to me, it's a little different or a little deeper, perhaps. It's really, to me, it's one's legacy, how I would want to be remembered by others after I pass. Um, and what I've done to help make the world a better place. And so toward that end, I've devoted a lot of time and effort, not just for jobs I've had, but also like you with different nonprofit or NGO
Right,
organizations.
right, right. Okay, brilliant. And so I'm assuming, I mean, you are a personal brand in your own right. So if I were to ask you, what are those signs that tell you that you are a personal brand? Are there some signs that come across to you saying over these years, yes, people have seen me as a personal brand for these reasons?
Well, I'm not sure if I really know what my own personal brand is because continually throughout my life and my career, I've strived to do the right things for myself, my family, my friends, the community, and the bottom line is really being true to myself and following my heart. And
Mm,
while not every decision I made may have been correct in hindsight,
mhm.
um, I don't have any regrets. I don't look back and say, what if I had done this or what if I had done that? Because
Okay.
I did, for right or wrong. And and um, and so in that regard, I've uh, followed, like I say, I followed the spirit and did where I was led, where my heart led me.
Okay. I mean, I know you're being very, very, very humble about your achievements and your background. So, if I were to ask you to, if you were reflecting on your journey, were there some specific steps you took to build your brand or to navigate through your career? Were there some specific thinking which went in?
Well, there's a lot of stories I need to share with you, and this may take a while, but
Sure.
ever since I was 9 years old,
Mhm,
roughly,
mhm.
I always followed my heart, and
Okay.
and this had to do with whatever choices I had as a kid and subsequently in my adult life,
Mhm,
and but it was always tempered with being fair and open and available to help others.
mm,
Um, in hindsight, like I say, not every decision I made was the right one, but I don't have any regrets.
mm,
Nor do I look back and wonder, if I had done this or done that or gone off in a different direction.
mm,
Um, I followed my heart as long as it didn't hurt anybody.
mhm,
Um, but anyway, getting back to and this also led to 7 or 8 career changes, as you may
mhm,
have noticed,
mhm.
looking at my LinkedIn site.
Right.
Uh, and but anyway, getting back to age 9, I was born and raised in Hawaii, the oldest of 2 kids. My
Mhm,
dad dropped out of school at when he was in the 8th grade during the Great Depression,
mhm,
which I'm afraid we may be seeing again pretty soon.
mhm,
But
mhm,
he dropped out of school to find a job to help as the oldest kid in the family to help support the family. And
Mm-hmm.
fortunately, he was probably the brightest of the three kids. He got very successful to the point where by the time I was of age to go to school,
Mm-hmm.
he sent me and subsequently my kid sister, who was
Mm-hmm.
6 years younger, to private schools from
Mm-hmm.
kindergarten all the way up to when we graduated, with the
Mm-hmm.
expectation that we would be professionals, doctors, lawyers, engineers, and the like, and not have to struggle like he and his siblings did during the
Mm-hmm.
Depression and have a good income.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so at age about 9, I picked up a saxophone, started playing, joined the school band. At 12,
Mm-hmm.
I got a guitar,
Mm-hmm.
formed the group, and started entertaining at parties and then at proms and the like.
Mm-hmm.
Until finally, in my senior year of school,
Mm-hmm.
knowing that my dad had literally invested thousands of dollars for my education and my sister's education, he
Mm-hmm.
came home from one of his business trips. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and again, mind you, this is with the eighth grade education. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
they sent him to Wharton School of Business, even with the eighth grade education, because he was very bright. And he took a lot of advanced courses there. But anyway, when he came home one day after one of his business trips, he said, "Hey,
Mm-hmm.
what colleges have you applied for, and what are you thinking
Mm-hmm.
of majoring in?" And I said,
Mm-hmm.
"Music, particularly voice." Well, he
Mm-hmm.
freaked out. And we had a falling out. And anyway, long story short, he says, "I didn't send you to a private school so you could learn how to sing opera, which is all they taught in voice in those days. And especially as a Japanese American, he says, you're not going to survive on that. You're not going to make a living." And I said, "I got to do what my heart is telling me to do." So I stayed at home until I graduated and then moved out because we weren't talking after that. Uh, and I had applied to Juilliard, which is a very good music school, but I didn't get accepted. But I did get accepted at Eastman School of Music, which is also a very noteworthy music college. But because of this falling out, and despite the fact that my dad could afford to send me there or pay for it, I moved out and I worked my way through college at the local university instead, still majoring in music. um, and uh, the what was funny was not funny, but what was ironic was because as I was growing up, my dad was a part-time beach boy and surfed a lot, and but he also played the ukulele a lot, and that's where I got my love
Okay.
for music, from
Okay.
him. So anyway, the um, like I say, we had a huge falling out, and but it was a result of my following my heart, which was one of many times that I've done that, which have been very rewarding and at times very stressful and very sad. Um, but uh, but like I say, I don't have any regrets. We subsequently, of course, um, got together again when I wrote a book on karaoke, or as they say here in the States, karaoke.
Karaoke,
Um,
yeah.
and he put together uh, improvised a carry-on piece of baggage so I could put a portable piece of equipment in there when I went
Mhm.
on. My wife and I went on 2 national book tours,
Okay.
and so I would, unlike most where you would set up in a bookstore, we'd go to other places
Mhm.
as well, and I'd start singing and attracting attention and start selling and signing books and everything else. But he was then very supportive, and he showed up at a lot of the book signings in Hawaii, stuff like that.
Nice. Nice. That's brilliant. I mean, that's a great story. Yeah, and I like the fact that you mentioned that you followed your heart and you stuck to your goals. But how did you make the shift to public relations? I mean, what is the
Well, it that was one of my, 7 or 8 career changes. And this may answer some of your other questions,
Right.
but I started working in radio and then television as a newscaster most of the time.
Okay.
But when I started working in television, this was during the Watergate era,
Okay.
and investigative reporting was very popular at the time for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
And so the NBC affiliate hired me, and the news director said, because you're local, you probably have a lot of contacts, and I want you to do a lot of investigative stories, which I did. Well, that led to being subpoenaed to court on 2
Oh,
occasions while I was
wow.
working there in order to reveal sources of news stories.
Okay.
I had promised my sources I would never identify them publicly, and I refused to do so. That was fine, except that behind the scenes, the station management begged me and urged me and almost ordered me to reveal the sources. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't go back on my word. I
Yeah.
promised these people that I would not endanger them, because some were in the underworld, some were in law enforcement, and it would either endanger them or jeopardize their jobs. Excuse me. So fortunately, in those 2 cases, the cases got settled before I had to face court, and because the judge had threatened to throw me in prison until until he was satisfied that I wasn't about to do that, and also fine me $1,000 a day. He had also threatened to fine the station $5,000 a day, which is why the station was begging me or urging me to comply with the court. Well, against that background, because these were stories about the underworld, there were rumors that there was a hit out on me as well. Because one of the stories, even though I never identified this person by name, had to do with the alleged godfather there. And while I was told by some very good sources that people had offered to get rid of me, he said no. I was afraid that other people would take it on their own initiative to do that, even though, even if they didn't ask him for permission to do so. So there was that pressure, and the fact that the attorney that represented the station attorney, was also representing me, knowing that the station had been urging me to comply with the court, and still represent me at the same time when I said no, I wasn't going to do that. And to add to that, my wife at the time, hearing of these rumors about a possible hit, also urged me behind the scenes to reveal the sources. So I had pressure professionally as well as domestically, and this was this was pretty bad.
I know.
Anyway, the station got sold to Fox, and when Fox heard about my troubles in court, they told the manager to fire me, which he did. And right after that, I got a 3rd subpoena, and went to court again, and was ordered to reveal the sources of my story, and I said I wasn't going to do that. Well, in pre-trial hearings or meetings, I should, the judge had already said, you better get your bags packed if you're going to stick by or maintain that you're not going to reveal the sources, and I'm also going to fine you again $1,000 a day. Of course, there was no threat to the station because they had already fired me, and so I informed the station, the news station management, of what had happened, and said, you owe me legal representation. They said, no, we're not going to do it. Fortunately, friends of mine, a lot of journalists and the like, put together a defense fund. And on the day that I showed up in court, I had my bag packed and everything else. And was prepared in case I had to go to prison and get fined for not revealing the sources. Lo and behold, the case, somebody came up to the judge and said the case was settled between the
Mm-hmm.
city and the plaintiff and in the case. So I never had to do that. Well, until then, media people then and even today, to maybe a lesser extent, kind of
Mm-hmm.
celebrities in their own communities, and people like to be your friends and
Right.
hobnob with you and everything else. And
Mm-hmm.
until all this started unraveling,
Mm-hmm.
I had a lot of so-called friends, and
Mm-hmm.
but when this started unraveling, all of a sudden they quickly started disappearing. At this third court hearing, there were a handful of people in court in the gallery. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and after the judge said, okay, this whole thing is dropped, I turned
Mm-hmm.
around, looked, and two of the people in the gallery
Mm-hmm.
were just shocked me. One was the uh, chairperson of the Honolulu City Council,
Okay.
and the other was the CEO of St. Francis Medical Center, who um, was Sister Maureen, and so when I turned around and looked out there at them, I was so shocked.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the chairwoman of the council left right away, but I walked up to Sister Maureen and I said, I
Mm-hmm.
walked there to thank her and acknowledge the fact that she, knowing that she was very busy as a CEO,
Mm-hmm.
had better things to do or to occupy her time with. And I told her that, and she looked at me and she looked toward the bench and she
Mm-hmm.
said, "You're welcome, but I just wanted him to know that as she looked skyward, that there's other people looking out for you." And
Mm-hmm.
in spite of the fact that there were very few people there to support me at the time, that was one of those very, very touching moments. And
Mm-hmm.
to answer your short question with a long answer, that's what, to me, helped me reach the conclusion that I was doing the right thing in terms of branding, if you will, by sticking to my principles and my gun,
Mm-hmm.
and honoring the confidentiality that I had pledged to those people
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Yeah.
that I had gotten valuable information from.
Yeah. I
Sorry
mean,
for the long.
this. No, I think this is great to know this context, and I think it adds so much depth and color to the fact about storytelling. Because I mean, or rather, personal branding, because it clearly says that if you are steadfast in your values, then irrespective of how the world is going, you will still come out strong. So it's great. I wanted to ask you, I mean, along your journey, I mean, who are some of the, personal brands, or if you could name one or two people whom you admire, and what characteristics about them do you admire? So a couple of names which come to your mind, and what about them that strikes you?
Oh my gosh, there are a lot, but
I know.
a couple of them are well known. One is still alive today, and that's former President Jimmy Carter.
Okay.
Uh, Carter may not have been the best president from based on what historians and academics might say,
Mhm.
but he was always true to his values and stuck to that. Um,
Mm,
and although I've met a lot of very big important people, including uh, former President George H. Bush
right.
when he was vice president. But
Mhm.
I never met President Carter. My mother-in-law, who uh, was very active in the community, worked side by side with him on a Habitat for Humanity project here in Cleveland,
Mhm.
and spoke very, very highly of him to the
Mhm.
point where when she turned 100 last December, he even sent her a birthday card. And
Mhm.
he's one of the very few politicians who never made a fortune out of being a politician. Uh,
Mhm.
Always has been humble, down to earth, and the like. And he displayed the kind of consistency, predictability, candor, and values that I believe form a person's legacy, if you will, or personal branding. And that's what he displayed. Same thing with former U.S. Representative John McCain, who also ran for president. Um, he spoke up very candidly, even among his own party members, knowing that it wasn't going to be popular and the like, because that's what he believed in. And throughout his whole career as a POW, as a politician or what have you, he stood tall among his, again, with his own virtue and values and the like, knowing that there was going to be some heat coming, and still maintaining his position, and telling people why. He was candid about it, and also very predictable in that sense.
Good. Um, so I mean, were there any like I probably asked you this question before, but were there any specific steps in your mind while you were changing your career paths? Were there some things going through your mind saying how I should be shaping my career, or how should I be shaping the brand I am?
It really um, really wasn't a planned or charted course. Um, what's always been uh, in the back of my mind since I was very, very young, through both
Mm,
my personal and professional life, have been those things about being true to myself and following my heart.
yeah.
And one of the things was I always felt that I needed to um, give back to the community. I needed to be a part of the community. And like you, I still help a number of NGOs or nonprofits today. Um, and even though it was never my goal, um, I was blessed to receive 2 national awards for volunteerism and community service. The uh, Helping others was something I had done since high school,
Mhm,
uh, and then so when I even started working in the for-profit sector,
mhm,
and I have to tell you that the reason I got into radio and initially was
mm,
that I wanted to still be around music,
mm,
but I did not care to be a DJ, if you will.
mm,
Um, and so I thought, well, maybe if I use my voice to deliver the news instead, I could be around music without having to
mhm,
spin records at the time, if you
mm,
will.
right.
And so that's how I got started in radio. And when I got hired into television, kind of going back a bit,
Mm,
it was at a time when not only Watergate had just broken, but the FCC came out with a mandate that all the TV stations hire more minority people.
mm,
And so both ABC and the state ABC and NBC stations got a hold of me. And like I say, I went to work for the NBC affiliate
mm,
until Fox took over.
right.
um, so um, being a part of the community was always part of it. The television thing was a surprise. I was never looking for a television job,
Mm,
but frankly, it sounded exciting. And I've always been open to challenges. And there was some ego involved, I'm sure.
mhm,
That when you walk into a restaurant and they say, "Hey, you're so and so from Channel 2," um, that it does give you that ego boost as well too. And then so there was that. But being the first to know what was going on out there was also exciting. And so I loved what I was doing at the time, and until I got fired. And um, uh, like I say, it was very good. So when I got fired from the TV station, I went to work for a CBS radio affiliate and formed
mhm,
my own business at the time, which was back in 1980. And I
mhm,
started doing a lot of um, documentaries based on my experience working in television particularly. And that opened some other doors. I did some work with, and did some commercial work, including with people like Dick Clark, whom I met and worked with. And besides the documentaries, I also did a lot of training. Uh, Having worked in the media and being a reporter, investigative reporter, I started teaching chief executives and spokespeople and the like how to communicate with the news media and everything else. So when that occurred, um, I, was operating my business for a while until a friend of mine who had worked with me at the TV station went to work for the electric utility and called me up and said, "Hey, um, the CEO is thinking of opening up a video department within their marketing PR uh, department, and you think you might be interested?" And I said, "Wow, that sounds exciting." Um, at that time, one of my more practical decisions, one of the few ones perhaps, since I was 40, was that I thought, gee, I better start thinking about retirement. And electric utilities have great retirement programs. So I applied for the job, got interviewed by the CEO, and basically got hired to set up a video operation, which um, didn't have any equipment at the time because it was new. And then lo and behold, a hurricane hit Oahu. I had my camera, so I got on a helicopter, did a lot of shooting, and sent out the first of what were video news clips, news releases to the TV stations to show the extent of the damage, because many of the transmission lines were in the mountains, and people could better understand why it was going to take a while when they saw these huge poles down in the mountains and wonder how people were going to get up there to even work on them and the like. So that helped to get a better understanding, and that led me to an interest in learning more about communications and PR. So I started learning more, joined PRSA, and one thing led to another. And so anyway, that's how I got involved with PRSA.
Okay, great. I mean, that's a very, very interesting journey. Along the way, I mean, if I would ask you, what are some of the challenges that you faced while you were building your personal brand?
Uh, Frankly, there weren't very many because I followed my heart, and um, uh, I can't think of any challenges really that I came across. I took them, if they came up, I didn't recognize them, or I just worked at whatever.
Okay.
Um,
And if I were to ask you, were there some aspects which you gained and some aspects which you lost while you were building your personal brand? So when I say gained or lost, I meant like when you focus a lot on your career, then of course the time with family and other things might reduce. Likewise, were there some things which you felt that you gained along the journey, and what did you lose according to you?
well, that's interesting because when I mentioned earlier, I had a lot of so-called friends when I started in television, and then they quickly disappeared when there
Right.
were rumors of a threat, and I started going to court and everything else. And at first, it was depressing and shocking, but
Mm.
in but after a while, it was actually very refreshing and even cleansing because I really knew who my true friends were.
Mm.
So in hindsight, that was a really good thing.
Mm.
Uh, the the worst part of it is, uh, I mentioned earlier that my wife at the time had urged me to comply with the court and everything else. Anyway, all that stress eventually led to our parting ways and everything else too. Um, so, but I still would not have done it differently, even if I could have predicted what was going to happen, because um, I had to remain true to what I had promised, and
Mm.
in spite of that.
Got it. Got it. Um, if you were to advise someone starting fresh, maybe a college graduate who's trying to get into the corporate world, what would be your advice if they were to take the first step in terms of starting a brand or thinking about their future or their career? What would your advice be?
Well, whether it's a personal brand for a company or an industry, or even in leaving one's own legacy,
Right.
I would recommend that the individual ask himself or herself how they wish to be remembered after they leave. And then what 3 words, there's no magic about three, it could be 4 or 5 or what have you, would
Mm,
describe, um, how they might be remembered
mm,
in terms of their character, uh,
mm,
and then form uh, a strategy around achieving that.
mm,
Um, and basically, to me, it's pretty much that. I don't think there's a template for everybody, but um,
mm,
if they follow that, I think chances of
mm.
success would be great.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think these are great points. If you had, I mean, like you mentioned, you wouldn't really go back and change, and you have no regrets about how your life has been. And but if there was one thing you would like to revisit and do it differently, what would that be?
I don't I don't believe I would change anything.
Okay, you wouldn't. And
No.
is there anything you would do differently? Uh, would you have
Oh,
invested in something more deeply? Those kind of things.
the only thing I would have done differently, had I been aware of it at the time, was that when my mother was hospitalized and said she was doing okay and passed away, I would have spent more time there.
Mm,
Um, but uh, at first I felt bad and guilty. I, not having had my dad give me all the facts and tell
mm,
me that she was actually dying. And so being, well, I'm not rationalizing, but I had other things I thought were important and I'd catch up at some point. And
mm.
had I known, I would have done that differently.
Got it. If there was something like a mantra or a short line of how you describe uh, personal branding success, is there something which would come to mind? Like you say, uh, be true to yourself is your line which you mentioned earlier. Is there something else which comes to your mind about a mantra?
Yeah, following your heart.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, and right now we are going through a pandemic, and like you mentioned, it's almost like a Great Depression, which
Mhm.
you have seen. What should personal brands do in these kind of situations? Should they pause everything they do, or should they revisit their approach? How should they kind of approach such crisis scenarios?
That's an interesting question because I worked a lot and taught and counseled a lot in crisis communications, risk management, and the like. Um, and for those things, there's steps that one can do in working for a company or the like. But for folks building their own brand or their own legacy, um, I truly believe they should continue the same path that they're on, um, and like it, with the recommendations that I made, and
Right.
not do anything differently.
Okay. Okay. And any last words of advice for millennials? Because there are a lot of these millennials out there who want to be, famous overnight. So, is there
Yeah.
some advice on what they can do differently or think differently about building personal brands?
Um, I would basically say just my answer would be the same as before.
Mm,
What would you like your legacy to be? But what else would you do to achieve it besides being, or could you do to achieve it besides being transparent, candid, or predictable? Um,
mm,
and add that. I don't have all the answers, but can only share with you what I did,
absolutely.
and And as you can tell, a lot of it was impulsive
Right.
by following my heart. But
Right.
but by keeping those values, I did it without any intent to hurt anybody or anything else. So I feel, I feel good about that.
Great. I mean, this has been a brilliant conversation. I really loved every part of it. Thank you so much, Scott, for taking the time. Appreciate you doing this. Thank you again. I will. What I'll do is I'll share the transcript with you, and then before it goes live, you will get a chance to review and share your thoughts, and then we'll post it live.
Okay, well, I appreciate that, and also, and I appreciate it even more because as a former journalist, that's something that a news person would never do before they air the story. But um, uh, if you also let me know where and when where and when it'll be posted and everything else, I'd be happy to share it in my social media network as well too, and hopefully get some people directed to your site.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Oh, my pleasure, and be safe.
All right. Take care. Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, thanks. Bye-bye.